Earlier we saw how Oskar Dirlewanger fought in World War I, where despite being badly wounded several times, always willingly returned to the front. Despite the end of the war, he managed to bring 600 men back to Germany from occupation duties in the east. He joined Freikorps units fighting against socialist insurgents in Germany and ethnic Poles in Silesia. He was wounded once more in 1921, and this time it was bad enough to finish his paramilitary career. He was an early member of the National Socialist German Workers' Party. He went to university and got a degree. When the Nazis were granted power in 1933, like many old fighters, he was given a cushy job. However, he seems to have resented some of the cushy jobs given to other old fighters, jobs they were clearly not capable of doing. This caused jealousy, and Dirlewanger found himself being investigated for rape amongst other charges. He went to prison and on getting out decided to go to Spain and fight in the war there. His old friend from World War I, Gottlob Berger, took him under his wing. Berger by this time was high up in the National Socialist administration. Berger arranged for him to head a special unit to do particularly dirty tasks. This unit was involved in crimes against Jewish people, first of all in the Lublin area and then in Lvov. After the outbreak of serious partisan activity in what is today Belarus in the winter of 1941 to 1942, he was sent there. This unit was involved in the anti-partisan fight, which is another way of saying butchering local civilians. In July 1944, the Eastern Front totally collapsed. From a starting point very approximately equivalent to the eastern border of Belarus today, the Red Army tore apart Army Group Centre and raced forward, held only back by its lack of supplies and supported by partisans which harassed, cut off and demoralised German stragglers. Dirlewanger's unit operating behind the lines got out before the army did, but such was the speed of the Red Army that many of them were caught up in the fighting. On the 1st of August 1944, the Warsaw Uprising broke out. Dirlewanger's unit was one of those sent to put down the uprising and kill all the civilians it came across. It killed thousands of civilians with the utmost brutality, with most of its troops and its leader in a drunken, armed stupor. The reports that we have from regular Wehrmacht soldiers show a total disgust at the behaviour of this unit. Nonetheless, the uprising was put down and Warsaw was recaptured. As the Sonderkommando Dirlewanger was being prepared to move to Warsaw in early August 1944, Himmler noted in a speech to gauleiters in Posen, today Poznań, that he had around 1,000 men at his disposal, which had recently been reinforced by men from the Soviet Union, above all Muslims. However, it's unlikely that Dirlewanger had as many as 1,000 men available given the catastrophic retreat during the previous month. Dirlewanger had been aware of this for some time. The lack of recruitable men fit for military service was becoming increasingly noticeable in the Waffen-SS. The selection of concentration camp prisoners for the Dirlewanger unit was therefore being intensified in the spring of 1944. In May 1944, according to prisoner statements, around 88 professional criminals from the Sachsenhausen concentration camp were assigned to the Dirlewanger commando, all of whom volunteered. That is, according to official correspondence. The selection took place as follows. From some blocks, the strongest and healthiest prisoners under 45 years of age were selected and housed separately. A commission of Waffen-SS officers inspected them and chose which ones could be discharged from the camp. Those discharged were given troop rations, clothes, and transported to Minsk on the 1st of June 1944. Only once there did they learn that they now belonged to the Dirlewanger unit. In the autumn of 1944, they even began to select political prisoners for Dirlewanger. A political prisoner was in a concentration camp for opposing National Socialist rule, maybe for being an active member of other political parties or trade unions. Dirlewanger himself made this suggestion in a letter to Himmler on the 7th of October 1944 and gave the following justification. There are men in the camps who in February 1933 and perhaps even after the 5th of March 1933 who did not immediately disguise themselves as National Socialists but initially remained true to their worldview and thus showed real character. In contrast to the many hundreds of thousands who sided with the stronger and immediately turned to us on the 5th of March 1933 with their right hand raised in the Hitler salute, despite their inner opposition to us. In other words, Dirlewanger wanted to recruit troops who had had the courage to oppose the National Socialist system. Some of these could have been in concentration camps for a very long time and consequently in very poor physical condition. National Socialist style rehabilitation had been a major feature of the unit from its inception. The original poachers, who in almost all cases had committed other offences as well, were earning their rehabilitation through combat in the Sonderkommando Dirlewanger. Himmler was of course aware that discipline needed to be very strict, and on the 20th of February 1944 he made the following 4 rules for the unit. 1. During combat operations, the commander has the right to decide the matter of life and death over all members of his battalion. 2. The rehabilitation of the former poachers takes place without the involvement of the main office of the SS court via SS Obergruppenführer Berger and SS Gruppenführer Niebuhr in the Reich Security main office through the Reich Ministry of Justice. The main office of the SS court was to receive notification of the rehabilitation from SS Obergruppenführer Berger. In other words, Gottlob Berger, Dirlewanger's sponsor, would decide who was rehabilitated and who was not. This could change later. 3. The commander of the battalion, SS Obersturmbannführer Dirlewanger, has the right to decide over the matter of life and death over the concentration camp prisoners until their rehabilitation is complete, even in the rest quarters and the field garrison. In other words, Dirlewanger could kill anyone in his unit whenever he felt like it, until such times as they were deemed rehabilitated. 4. After their rehabilitation, the poachers were subject to SS jurisdiction, wherever that may be. So, once they'd been rehabilitated, if they committed another crime, they could be punished once more. For example, they could be sent to the SS punishment camp at Danzig-Matzgau, amongst other places. As one can see, Dirlewanger's powers were subject to very wide limits, and even being subject to the SS administration was in theory only. In practice, the SS court main office was unable to apply SS jurisdiction to the former SS members under Dirlewanger's command. On the 12th of October 1944, Himmler ordered the dispatch of an SS judge to Dirlewanger, who was to act as the head of the court and deal with rehabilitation cases. However, the SS judge had to leave after Dirlewanger threatened him. Given the way that Dirlewanger could shoot his own men for no reason at all, it was not a surprise that the SS judge left so quickly. It was only after a complaint to Himmler that a regular SS field court was set up in the unit in December 1944. Following approval from Himmler, by the 10th of November 1944, another 1,910 prisoners had been recruited for Dirlewanger. They came from all the major camps: Auschwitz, Buchenwald, Dachau, Flossenburg, Gross-Rosen, Mauthausen, Neuengamme, Ravensbrück, Sachsenhausen and Stutthof. Release and transport was to be arranged by the camp commanders and only included those former political opponents who, in the camp commander's own firm conviction, had changed internally and wished to prove this by participating in the fight of the Greater German Reich. That was the theory. The practice was somewhat different, as political prisoners were sent to Sonderkommando Dirlewanger in both November 1944 and early 1945. Here is an account from a former political prisoner from Sachsenhausen. On the 17th of November 1944, we, the inmates, were called together and an SS officer told us that we had 2 options. Either we would be shot in the back of the neck, or we could join the Waffen-SS, specifically the Sonderkommando Dirlewanger. As we didn't want to die, we had no choice but to report. The politicals were, however, the minority of the unit's prisoner contingent, the majority of which consisted of asocials and professional criminals. SS Judge Dr. Bruno Wille was transferred to the SS Court main office at the beginning of December 1944. His job was involved in the rehabilitation of the defenders. By this time, the Sonderkommando, thanks to these recruitment efforts, had now grown into a brigade and had been deployed to Slovakia. There were now around 6,500 men in it. The corps was still made up of the old poachers whom Dirlewanger had now promoted to the highest subordinate positions and who, without justification, sometimes wore full SS uniforms. Referring to the Germans in the unit, Wille estimated that 10 to 15% were former members of the Waffen-SS and police who had been punished and expelled from the Waffen-SS and who had had to serve their probationary period here for the purpose of rehabilitation. These men would have come mainly to Dirlewanger via the camp at Danzig-Matzgau. Around 30% were concentration camp prisoners, both political and criminal. More than half of the brigade, however, were members of the three branches of the Wehrmacht, Army, Air Force and Navy, who had had previous convictions. They were almost all people who had been convicted of capital crimes and, to quote Wille, in human terms represented the worst that a people could bring into a force. All units of the battalions were led by punished former officers without rank insignia, and the brigade staff were also made up of punished or at least transferred officers. 2 batteries of regular police artillery were also assigned to the brigade. These men were the only unpunished soldiers in the entire unit. This composition of the brigade explains why it countered a lot of resistance even within the SS and was never made into a fully fledged Waffen-SS formation. Wille's opinion was, and I quote, "It was a mockery of every soldier's tradition and sense of honour to make such a lost bunch of poachers and criminals into a military unit and thus to equate them with the arms bearers of the nation." However, the top leadership made little fuss about such objections. In pursuit of their expansion of power, they had to meet completely different standards. Dirlewanger himself was more of a Freikorps leader and party soldier than an officer in the old army. Himmler himself described the Dirlewanger unit as follows. "The tone of the regiment is of course in many cases, I would say, medieval, with beatings, etc. Or if someone questions our ability to win the war, then he falls dead because someone else shoots him. There's no other way to deal with such people." A former company commander of the unit also reported that the treatment methods in the unit were completely arbitrary. Beatings and shootings took place without any legal proceedings, even without reason or for minor offences. When drunk, which was often the case, Dirlewanger personally shot members of his unit on mere suspicion of some infraction. The treatment of the concentration camp prisoners assigned to Dirlewanger was particularly rigorous. Despite the fact that these people were now supposed to fight on the side of their previous oppressors, they continued to be treated like prisoners. They were only given ammunition shortly before being deployed to the front. The slightest attempt at escape, or perceived escape, would lead to an immediate death sentence by shooting. The prisoner companies were kept away from the other companies as far as possible. This treatment of the troops naturally did not have a particularly positive effect on morale. During the deployment in Slovakia, numerous members of the unit had deserted. Some of them even sold their weapons. When the unit was deployed to the front in Hungary in December 1944, the recruited political prisoners, mostly former Communist Party members, defected to the Soviets in droves. This is Banska Bystrica in Slovakia. On the 29th of August 1944, this was to be the centre of one of the largest uprisings during the Second World War. The Slovak uprising was aimed not only against Nazi Germany, but also against the Slovak collaborationist regime of Josef Tiso. The Slovak uprising is the only one I know of where the rebels had their own air force. Well, it was an air force of sorts. They had their own planes. However, it was supported by units of the armed forces of Slovakia, which in theory was allied to Nazi Germany. Slovakia is mountainous, and given the destruction of Nazi forces on the Eastern Front and the proximity of the Red Army, then the time seemed appropriate to rebel. However, just as in Poland, Stalin had no intention of helping the Czechoslovak government in exile in London. Very little assistance was given by the Soviet Union, and as a result the uprising ended on the 28th of October 1944, when the military leadership of the insurgents gave up the open fight against the Wehrmacht, and with the fall of Banska Bystrica it switched to partisan warfare, which was continued until the occupation of Slovakia by the Red Army in April 1945. In October 1944, Dirlewanger's unit was transferred to Slovakia at the instigation of Gottlob Berger, who had been military commander here for a month. The role of Dirlewanger was, as in Warsaw, to take part in the suppression of the Slovakian uprising. Berger's successor as German commander was General of the Waffen-SS Hermann Höfler. He claimed to have refused their deployment, but Himmler overruled him. Himmler replied sharply that Höfler did not even know the unit. Moreover, this brigade was very disciplined due to the strict measures that had been laid down for it. Incidentally, I need to point out that this is not the same Hermann Höfler who sent the telegram related to Holocaust deaths. I've done a separate video on that Hermann Höfler, and there will be a link to it below. During this time, a replacement company was set up in Krakow. At the beginning of December, the entire unit was deployed to the northern Hungarian sector of the front, where, as already mentioned, several hundred men defected to the Red Army. This was probably the reason why the troops were soon withdrawn from the line of contact with the Soviets. In January 1945, the unit was stationed in Prievidza in Slovakia. The prisoners, who were recruited in mid-January 1945, received military training there for around 2 weeks. When Himmler became Commander-in-Chief of Army Group Vistula in January 1945, he brought together all the forces available to him on the Oder front. At the end of January, the entire Dirlewanger Assault Brigade was loaded and transported to Germany, despite protests from Colonel General Heinz Guderian and SS Brigadeführer Hermann Fegelein, who wanted it disbanded. It arrived in Guben around the 12th of February 1945 and was deployed in the Guben sector from the 18th of February 1945, just before the Red Army got there. Once more, Dirlewanger was in the thick of the fighting. Once more he was wounded, this time by a gunshot wound to the chest. He was sent to a hospital. In the months of November 1943 to January 1944, when Dirlewanger was injured, his then adjutant, SS Hauptsturmführer Erwin Walzer, led the unit. When Dirlewanger was wounded this time, command passed to SS Brigadeführer Fritz Schmedes. Dirlewanger would never return to his unit. As soon as he was gone, Dirlewanger's name was removed from that of the unit. On the 19th of February 1945, the unit was renamed the 36th Waffen-SS Grenadier Division. Dirlewanger's unit may have been able to fight unarmed civilians, but it wasn't very good at fighting trained soldiers with weapons. After the Red Army broke through the Oder line in April 1945, the unit was involved in the fighting southeast of Berlin and was scattered. The bulk of the brigade was surrounded on the 27th of April 1945 near Halba, and those that survived were taken prisoner by the Soviets on the 29th of April 1945. Thus ended the Sonderkommando Dirlewanger. In part 5 we shall see how Oskar Dirlewanger fared after leaving his unit.